Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Andrew, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's gonna be a wild ride. GG, motherfuckers.
In a surprising move, North has benched long-time in-game leader MSL, with cadiaN, formerly now of Rogue, coming in to replace him. Niko, the player who they picked up in a trial swap from Heroic when they swapped Mertz over there and Niko came the other way. His trial has ended. He supposedly goes back to Heroic, even though his future there is uncertain. And replacing him comes in Gade, the prodigal son, returning after his time in North Academy. He went over to Optic. Now he's coming back and he's going to play for the main North lineup, where he'll be playing under former coach Ave, who is obviously now the coach of the North squad. So even though these moves center around more players than just MSL, the big story is MSL getting benched here. And obviously in the context that he was literally the MVP of DreamHack Masters Stockholm, like what, 2 weeks ago, but then went on and had a disastrous major, did not even make top 16 there, and generally has not managed to deliver at the majors. The best he's done is finish top 8. That's about it. So let's look at this. First of all, in terms of North removing MSL. Now, first and foremost, the biggest problem in North was not MSL. So this was not an absolutely required move that had to happen. But I can see the logic. First of all, it gives you a fresh start, whoever you get. MSL has been one of the main themes of your team. The entire time North as an Orgs had this squad. And obviously, going back before that into Dignitas, he's been the guy who's been defining the style of play, the types of players you get, how those players are used. And there are certain parameters and a certain paradigm that comes with having MSL as your in-game leader that you're quite frankly just not going to ever change wholesale. So you can see that when Ave came along, when Wimp became the GM of the squad, they did start to pick up different types of players, and they did start to make different moves in terms of how they brought in players and how they kicked players and the timing on that. And also, I even saw, and this is what I thought Ave's influence was, even the pick ban seemed to actually change up a little bit, because North has always had a good map pool under MSL, but as I've often pointed out, they don't always exploit it, and they don't always punish opponents in the veto, and so a lot of the top in-game leaders will take chances against North, knowing they won't be punished, where they wouldn't take that chance against cadiaN, against Greb, against these kinds of in-game leaders, even against Fallen. I can see the value of trying out a different in-game leader, also because it will help test out the flaws elsewhere within the lineup, because you know what an MSL team's like, and you've given this particular core of players a long time with MSL, but some of them you don't want to make hasty judgments on, like, is Kirby ever going to be a star player again? Maybe we'll find out with a different in-game leader. Is someone like AZ gonna play better? Is he gonna be different in a different system? Is he someone who's just resigned to being a good supportive player now? Maybe he can be a star player again. Who knows? Let's see in another system. Valde's very good. Certainly he's seemingly had his career peak. But is he the same type of player he was in Heroic? Let's find out with a different in-game leader, right? It was already implied, I noticed in interviews, that when Ave came on as the coach this year and Rogger went off to Optic, that Ave got to be a little bit more hands-on in this team, have more influence, have more impact, maybe even get to MSL, change some of his thinking on some of these things. And it was Ave and Wimp who were controlling some of the moves in North, not MSL in the traditional in-game leader decides everything approach, which quite frankly existed up until about this year. Now, if you look at North, they wanted MSL AWPing, they wanted someone to have a primary AWP, and that just quite frankly didn't make sense long run. So if he had to do that role, yes, he has to go as an individual player. I do think, though, that MSL was not just valuable, but a very valuable player in North, because he brought that strong grinding T-style, he prepares his teams pretty well, he has a good sense for how to use players generally, give him enough time and he'll find out the right role for someone. He brought up many newer talents, which is a position they're back in having to try out again, because so many of the best players in Denmark currently play in Astralis or are making that sick bank and Optic and waiting for another chance to one day may play in North. So there was a lot of value in having MSL, but he brought with him a lot of baggage and a lot of kind of preconceptions about the game that, quite frankly, I think people like Ave didn't necessarily vibe with, even though they were willing to give it a chance. Now, adding cadiaN as his replacement. Okay, role for role, he's got two roles here, AWPer and in-game leader. As an AWPer, yes, a much better AWPer. I've always said cadiaN is a very underrated player, actually. People act like he's trash and because he lost to a girl in a 1v1 and he's been on a bunch of bad teams, he's a bad player. Absolutely not. I think this guy is better than most of the players that are played in Heroic. So I think people have really underestimated him. Now, he's certainly not a star player. He's never going to be the best player on a top 10 team in the world, but he can be a contributing player. He can be an AWPer who can do his job as an AWPer, can actually be pretty decent. So I think he's going to be better than MSL as an AWPer. As an in-game leader, it is far from certain he is going to be better. I would have to go ahead and guess he'll probably be worse, because I think MSL is a pretty good in-game leader, specifically at tactics, setting up, executing, reading the opponent. Those things, he's a very good in-game leader. I don't really know about cadiaN in that sense. This Rogue squad was absolutely a bunch of misfits. They didn't do a whole lot. They didn't go that many big tournaments overall. So it's hard to get a read on how he'll perform, contrasted to who MSL was having to play against and the big tournaments he was going to. But maybe they want someone who's fresher, someone who they can guide, someone who a legendary. For my money, Ave is the best in-game leader to ever play Counter-Strike. I didn't follow Source, so I can't come on existence there. I think Ave's #1 of all time. So, you know what? Having a fresh in-game leader who's only just taken on the role, now he can to some degree be the vassal, the vessel, both of them actually, of Ave, as it were. He can learn Ave's style, Ave's philosophy. He can implement some of the things Ave wants more, whereas MSL has his own idea on the game, has developed his own comprehensive and cohesive system and philosophy of how to play. So Ave can potentially influence some of what cadiaN does in this sense. I also think it's worth pointing out, as a side note, remember, DreamHack events allow the coach to talk the whole time during the game. What was the event North won? DreamHack Masters Stockholm. I would speculate, I don't know how much, that Ave got to talk more during that. They didn't have to use timeouts as much, that he could have input round to round. And the thing about Ave was he was a very, very good player, in-game leader, coming up with stuff on the fly. So I could see him adding a lot to those sorts of rounds. And with MSL taking on a new role, I wonder if Ave had more kind of fingers in pies in that sense and was actually having more of a direct puppet master control of the team. I don't want to go too far the other way, make it like MSL didn't in-game lead. No, definitely not. But compared to other events, there was more leeway there. And they had the success there. Then they went to the major where you can't do that. And now MSL's benched from the team. Now, niko leaving the team, that's a bit of a whatever. Like, he looked really good at DreamHack Stockholm in his role. Stats were nothing special. At the major, he still seemed like he was doing his job okay, but they didn't have him for very long. So you know what? If they didn't really like him, perhaps they didn't think he fit as an individual, perhaps it would have cost too much to properly buy him from Heroic. I don't know what the situation is, but I don't necessarily mind them letting him go. The problem I have is replacing him with Gade. Now, I was very underwhelmed by Gade when I saw him in Optic. I even watched a few of the North Academy games, and okay, I get why people were hyping Mertz. I don't really get why they hyped Gade, though. He didn't really seem to have a very complete understanding of the game. He had some decent aim, but even then he wasn't like dominating lower level opposition. So I don't really know what they was thinking with him in his role in Optic. I do think he probably got role fucked and he was the guy with what was left over because of all the veterans and all the big names in the team. So I'll give him some leeway in that sense. And I'll also say, Ave's worked with him before in North Academy. Ave perhaps has a better sense of what to do with him. I hope if he's coming to this team, that's because they're going to turn him loose. They're going to give him one of the better roles in the team, and they give him a chance to be a valuable player, not just another player, as we've seen in the past with Body on G2, with AZ on Dignitas back in the days, where you take a talented player who still has room to grow, but he doesn't get to grow because he has to play a shitty role. People think he's bad. He gets kicked down to a low-level team and takes a year, 2 years to work his way back up again, becomes a star on one of those teams, and one day gets properly recruited as a star. That's what it would seem like the life cycle of Gade's going to be, but obviously Ave, as someone who has worked with him, perhaps can use him and show him to be a better player. I'm going to go ahead personally and assuming North will end up on a similar level to where they were when you ignore the DreamHack result, which is, you know what, a low top 10 team, a team around there who can lose to some teams below them, but can also win maps and potentially occasionally a series off a team ranked above them. I think they've got some solid talent, and I can think they can potentially improve because of the talent they've got, but it's going to very much decide on how the in-game leading goes, because obviously someone like cadiaN is not on the level of an MSL in-game leading-wise, so I don't think right off the ground he's going to have the same control. He's going to have to figure out what he wants to do with certain players. MSL, on the other hand, I don't think he's going to have any troubles at all finding a team. I know he doesn't have the same public rep and outside of the industry, but I think a lot of people appreciate what MSL does. I think there's plenty of teams out there could use him. I think there's even teams better than North that should actually consider, if we want to go the tactical route and we can get this guy to give up some of his sort of stubbornness from other scenarios, this might be the guy that can make us a championship level team. There's plenty of teams out there trying to play super loose with just a bunch of good players who could use a bit of structure, quite frankly, and go somewhere closer to the middle. Like, people think there's just Astralis G2 big, super tactical, or there's FaZe Clan. Now, FaZe Clan is the most extreme version ever of a loose team, and even they, first of all, have a fantastic in-game leader at making reads, so it plays to their strengths. Secondly, they have some roles and amazing players playing the roles. And thirdly, they didn't even win everything. So if that's your best example, don't ever try that style. I don't know what people think they learned from the early NIP to think that super loose is really good. No. You still have a system. You still have certain players who play off each other. You still have basic tactics. You still have basic calls. People need to go a bit more towards the middle. You have to know the rules before you can break them either way and really understand what you're doing there. So I think MSL could help a lot of teams. I will say he's done a very poor job in terms of the politics of the scene and marketing because of some of the statements he's made, because of the times he's complained and whined. That means there's people in the scene who could play with him, who could use him as an in-game leader, who might not want to because they might think he's an arsehole or he's just a whiner or whatever. But I can tell you, he's the sort of person where he just sometimes doesn't come off very well on social media. If you talk to him, if you reason with him, he's a very, very reasonable person. He has a very good knowledge of the game in his own particular lens and idiosyncrasies. So I think this is one of those moves where on some levels I don't like it. On others I understand why it had to happen though. And I think in the long run it could end up helping both parties, MSL and North, and they could both get to a very high level, much as when cadiaN was kicked from Astralis, he went and made FaZe not just good but eventually amazing and even was beating Astralis. And Astralis got Glaive, have since won 2 majors, have since been fantastic and have since exceeded what they did with cadiaN. So again, this could be a move that works well for both people. This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, godawfulwasteofspace, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Now, do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly AMA. Would you like teasers to see who's coming next on my upcoming content and what's going to be coming down the pipeline? Perhaps you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today via the Patreon link below.